but it is a really important topic, so it'll be really good today to hear from you about your practice in this area, and also the issues that you're facing, and share those as practitioners. And we've also got some guest speakers as well, who will be able to shed some light for us on that topic. So just to mention as well, we very much do welcome your thoughts on topics that we can cover. So Jess and I chose this topic. I think it's a very relevant topic for anybody working with children and young people. But we really do welcome any thoughts that you've got for future topics. This is your forum as practitioners. So if you have got anything, please do feel free to drop it in the chat at any point during the session, and we'll pick that up. Or to email myself or Jess with those suggestions. We run the sessions quarterly, as many of you know, and we very much do welcome your thoughts and ideas of things that you'd like to discuss. So do share those if you've got any thoughts on that. I'm going to hand over to Jess now, let her introduce herself, and then we'll get on to our speakers.
Thanks, Jenny. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all. As Jenny said, fantastic to see so many of you here. Welcome to those of you who may be new. I know we've had even more people signing up to this over the last quarter, so really great to see you all here. I'm Jess Manning. I'm another Youth Justice Oversight Manager at the YJB. I predominantly cover South East services, but have also worked across London and the South West as well now. So yeah, really sort of great oversight across the region, and it's great to see so many of you from those regions here today as well. I just wanted to give a bit of a background really before we sort of make a start today. As Jenny said, we chose this topic. I think it's quite timely at the moment, and it'd be great to also sort of give some space to yourselves as practitioners to really hear of your experiences of supporting girls in relation to this topic. So I really wanted to recognise something quite fundamental, I think, in relation to talking about online harms, and that's recognising that I think for this generation, especially those who grew up during COVID, online life is their real life, and it doesn't exist as a separate world or a separate entity. It's really for a lot of girls and a lot of children where friendships are formed. I think support is found, information's gathered, and really their identities can be explored as well. So for many girls, I think online spaces can feel safer, quite often more validating, or more predictable than quite often they might find in the offline world. So I think when we talk about this topic in the context of being online, we're talking about something that really is a real and meaningful part of their lives. Today we're going to focus on some of the challenges and the risks around being online, but I think it's equally important to acknowledge the positives that there are as well, and that the internet can be a space of creativity, community and connection, as I already said. I think many girls can find belonging online, or discover resources and other voices that may help them feel to be seen and understood by others as well. So we really don't want our today's session to paint the online world as a bad space, but it's really to sort of recognise the full picture. And we want our children and our girls to enjoy really what the digital world has to offer, while being equipped, of course, to navigate it safely. I think it's really important as well to, as we explore sort of some of the themes that come out of today's session, to acknowledge that girls' experiences online are not all the same. So if we think that gender can intersect with race, culture, disability, neurodiversity, sexuality, children's lived experiences, I think that means that some girls may experience and may face harm, unfortunately, in a way that's not only gendered, but could intersect with other areas of their identity as well. So I think recognizing these intersections can help us to understand really the real experiences behind sometimes when we look at data and statistics, and really ensures that our responses and support are inclusive to all girls. I think that's why it would be great to hear from yourselves as frontline practitioners, managers, around your experiences with some of the girls that you're working with, and really bring their voices into the conversation. One of the areas that we're going to explore today is online misogyny. I think this is something that unfortunately is becoming more visible in our society and a lot more normalised, and crucially I think has an impact on the way that girls can feel about themselves, their relationships and their place in this world. We know that harmful content can show up in quite subtle ways, so through social media, often influencers promoting stereotypical roles and views, or through controlling behaviour that may be sort of framed as relationship advice. And I think to really help girls recognise some of these patterns is a crucial part of supporting their confidence and well-being. So what role do we play in this as practitioners coming together today? I think we really have that responsibility to understand this digital landscape and not to restrict it, but to really guide girls and children through it. We know that the online world changes rapidly and is changing every day at a rate that none of us in a way feel that we can sort of keep up with. And it's often our children and our girls that are navigating these pressures and experiences that some of us never had to face at their age. So I think that's why staying open, really curious and non-judgmental is important, and we would ask for you to bring those values into today's session as well. I think girls need adults who listen, who genuinely understand their challenges and who offer support to them. And I think our role is to help them make sense of what they see online and know how to respond when things may feel unsafe or unfair. So ultimately, today's session is about empowerment, not fear. We don't want to fearmonger you. We don't want to make things sound worse than they are, but we really want to understand and we want to not tell our girls what they should or shouldn't do online, but want to make them feel confident, informed and in control of what they're doing. I think it's about helping them to recognise what feels healthy, what doesn't, know their rights, set boundaries and understand where they can go to for help from trusted professionals such as yourselves. So I think with that foundation in mind, I'm going to hand back over to Jenny, who is going to take us into our first key topic and introduce our opening speaker.
Thanks, Jess. Really, some really important points there, I think. And I know that I myself am probably quite guilty of just being quite terrified by the online world a lot of the time. And I say that, you know, in terms of working with girls and also having daughters myself. And I think it's really important, isn't it, to step into their shoes and their world and their reality, because it's not going anywhere. And, you know, we need to understand that and the sort of the relevance of that world to them as well, the importance of that world. So our first speaker is going to be talking to us about online misogyny, and she is Kim Barker is a professor of law at the University of Lincoln, so has a wealth of expertise in terms of regulation around and sort of the legal space around the online world, but also in particular looks at and has done a great deal of work on online violence against women and girls, social media regulation, online harms and online safety, and online misogyny. So she's going to share some of her work with us today, some of her findings, some of her thoughts, which we really, really value. And then we will have some time for questions and some discussions. So over to you, Kim. Are you with us? I'm sure I saw you pop up.
I am, yeah.
Brilliant. Good.
I will share my slides and I will pray that the technology works.
We all will, yeah.
Hopefully you can see my slides.
Yeah, that's come out, Kim.
All right, perfect.
And we've got, yeah, perfect. Thanks, Kim.
Well, thank you for the introduction. I always feel like I have to live up to an introduction when it's given like that. I think it is important before I start with some of the negativity to highlight that without the internet, I wouldn't be doing this with you this afternoon. So there are all sorts of pros and cons. I think outside of that, I will try and control my inner cynicism about the current legal landscape in terms of online harms generally, and particularly harms affecting girls and women, because they are unique. They have all sorts of particular characteristics which make them difficult to deal with, which make them cross-platform, intersectional, and really demanding in a system which is not designed or shaped by women at its core. So it makes it difficult to get that message across to begin with in the criminal justice system. It makes it really hard to get the impact and the trauma across to those who are working in it in some contexts. And I think that is kind of my baseline dose of cynicism. So I'm going to walk through some I guess, pretty scary statistics, and then talk a little bit about some of the responses and things that might help when we're dealing with harms and the trauma, and I call it trauma because it is trauma, of being a girl in the online world. I think the other thing I would maybe start by saying is I very much come at this from a legal regulation perspective a lot of the time, and there is no hiding from it. The current legal framework nationally, regionally, across Europe, even internationally, doesn't really deal with this stuff particularly well. We have some things which are starting to come to fruition. The Online Safety Act is getting a lot of attention, but I would suggest that it is not doing what it needs to do in this space yet. It might, but at the moment we are not there in terms of what it is capable to do and the problems that it is really designed to address. So I said I wasn't going to be too cynical, but I've started with my big bullet point of cynicism about the legal framework. Having said all of that, I think just to put in context some of the problems, this is not a new problem. I don't think anything in the online harm context, gendered, intersectional, or otherwise, is new. I think what is new is that we are much clearer about the scale, prevalence, breadth, depth, and continuity of the problem. At least 77% of girls and young women have faced some kind of online harm, at least. We know that is probably a below par level of reporting because there are a number of people who just will never report any kind of online harm, any kind of online issue that they've experienced. 85% of young women have encountered some kind of sexism. That's without it being harmful, that's just sexism. And I think when you put those two statistics together, you get pretty much to the point where almost everybody is experiencing some kind of online harm, sexist or otherwise. That becomes a little bit scarier when we dig in a little bit more to some of the data that we do have. And we don't have a huge amount of data across the spectrum, but we are starting to get to it. So around 20% of children aged between 10 and 15 have exchanged messages with someone they've never met in person. I say never met in person because that data relates to interactions which we don't think refer to AI chatbots, but the age of the AI chatbot now is a new dimension to this particular problem. The flip side to that is where there are problems, there are response mechanisms, and there's an awful lot of safety work which we do as women offline, and we're starting to see that creep of safety work online. So girls are normalized to taking measures to stay safe. They are making their profiles difficult to find. They're muting who can respond to them. Those are safety measures which no legal, regulatory, or justice body will suggest should be taken, but they are normal responses for people engaging in the online world to prevent themselves being exposed to some of the online harm. What's really scary that we don't necessarily talk about as much as we should is online blackmail, what's now really morphing into sextortion and cyberbullying. And about a quarter of online blackmail cases in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland in the last couple of years have been targeted at under 18s. That statistic, I suspect, will increase as the prevalence of this increases. Other forms of harm are also really scarily on the rise. Child sexual exploitation and abuse material has shot through the roof in 2024, 50,000 plus cases of that. That figure will increase. We know that because the rise of AI imagery and abusive AI imagery will also shoot through the roof. And I think, while not being too negative about what the online world can offer us, that is just a snapshot of some of the challenges that any actor in the justice system is having to deal with. But the kind of the key headlines to take away from that is it's relentless. It can be nuanced or it can be really overt forms of harm. It is cross-cutting, it is cross-platform. It will reach you as a young woman or a girl anywhere. And that's the other thing about online harm, which is really different to some of the offline harms that we're perhaps more used to dealing with. You've got your smartphone, you've got a device, you're sharing any kind of internet connected technology. There is a way for harm to reach you now, and that is almost unfiltered as a default. And the next thing to bear in mind is that if you have any kind of characteristic, race, religion, disability, neurodivergence, whatever it might be, that will exacerbate and give you a greater level of exposure in online contexts. And that means that your prevalence and potential for exposure to abuse is through the roof. It makes it much harder to exist online. And I started with a degree of cynicism about the legal framework. I think my headline point is that we talk about online harm and online abuse and online violence. We don't have a particularly good legal definition of any of those things. What we talk about instead are different behaviors, which might mean that there is a criminal element or a justice element to it. But really, what we're talking about in the context of girls and girls' experiences in the online world is anything which has a gendered dimension to it. That might be sexual, it might not be, but there is still a gendered aspect to it. And a lot of this is driven by the misogynistic attitudes which are driving a lot of the content that we see now. I don't really want to place all of the blame for this at the door of Andrew Tate and his manosphere friends, but there is an awful lot of that influence which is driving a lot of the content, which is difficult to escape from once you've encountered it once on the basis of the algorithms. We talk a lot at the moment about deepfakes, rightly, in light of some of the recent developments in terms of what technology platforms are allowing to happen. But the really concerning thing for me is not that we're talking about what those platforms are allowing to happen, it's that we're not talking about the responses, and those responses have been so slow. I think the fact that we're only just getting to an investigation into Grok and the sexual deepfake ability to generate content now is really concerning, because this shouldn't have been a surprise in the context of responses. So on the slide is just a snapshot of some of the most appalling forms of harm and the most prevalent forms of harm that we know are going on out there. We don't have complete comprehensive statistics. They don't exist. They will never exist until we find an automated way to gather that information. But the behaviors themselves are the things which are causing harm, irrespective of what a legal or justice response might be. The misogyny, the abuse, the coordinated harassment that we're starting to see track people across different platforms and across different devices, that makes it really difficult to escape from. Whereas previously you could block and mute and silence on one platform, if you have presence on multiples or in multiple environments, it is now very easy for people to track you cross-platform and to perpetrate similar kinds of abuse and harassment in different spaces, which means you can't escape from it at all. And that presents a number of challenges. And this is really scary when you put it in the context of what should be a tool and a force for good in the context of what we do every day. A huge number, around 98% of women and girls are reporting to the revenge porn helpline. When they look at their statistics, only 2% of those are not women and girls in the context of the images reported, which tells us that actually, as soon as you are a young woman or a girl online and there is some kind of image which is posted, shared, created, or manipulated, that is affecting almost everybody in the online space, whether you know about it or not. The first scary thing about that is that the images you share can be abused. The second scary thing about that is that you don't even have to now share an image for it to be an abusive image of you and for it to be disseminated and be sexually explicit. Real or not, they are very difficult to detect, and once they're out there, they are very difficult to take down. And that presents all sorts of trauma across the life cycle. It's not just an immediate piece of trauma and harm, it persists. It's out there. The sharing of it is what causes a lot of issues for a lot of women and girls. I think the other thing about this is that we're increasingly seeing women do safety work, which means they're avoiding sharing photos of their face, because that is one of the safety steps you can take to prevent some of the AI tools taking your image and being used to create deepfakes. But obviously it presents then expression challenges, it presents networking and friendship group challenges in these spaces, which should be used for good as well. And the other thing about this is that once that image is out there and has been abused, it follows you across your life cycle. So as a young girl, if that happens, then it affects how you interact online in your teens. It then affects how you react and interact online as a young woman, and it follows you through your life course. And that is a harm that we're not yet particularly recognizing, but we are beginning to understand that that is a period of trauma which doesn't actually have an end point, and that presents additional challenges. The other thing, which I think is particularly worthy of note, is that we are starting to understand that even within the category of girls and young women, there are different experiences for those different groups at different ages, and there are different responses and different reactions by those groups to what should be happening where there is a problem triggered by online harm. There are some really interesting things starting to come out of some European agencies which explore this in a bit more detail, but some of the emerging information tells us that when it comes to reporting of images or online abuse, there is a complete disconnect in terms of what we think is good and what they think is good and appropriate. So there are polarized opinions. a lot of these groups of girls view reporting as way too serious, particularly in the school context, but also to a platform as completely inadequate. And there is therefore this massive gulf in the middle between what those reporting systems, mechanisms, and support responses should be. And so when we talk about reporting and what we think is an appropriate response mechanism, I think we are learning that what we think is appropriate is maybe not what the women and girls who are experiencing these kinds of harm at different ages to us thinks is appropriate. And that presents some interesting challenges for support and report, because what we think we're doing right, we're probably not doing right. I think to put this in context, and I realize this is all about image, but image is currently the topic of the week. It's very simple for this to go really wrong really quickly for a young woman or a young girl. So if you're a teenager, you take images, you share those images willingly or not, usually not. Those images are then circulated, you're threatened, that turns into sextortion. It can easily then spiral very quickly and very easily into grooming and other forms of image abuse. And what we're starting to see is that that image abuse at a very high level very quickly now is turning into online forms of trafficking, online forms of sextortion, the deepfake pornography sites, and all of that. And it's all about control, coercion, and how you exacerbate the initial harm so that there is a panic response, which then triggers more of the sharing and creates a complete culture and environment of fear. And the second kind of side to that is what I'm going to call something which falls outside of the current legal framework, the nudification apps, where you can download any app pretty easily without necessarily paying. You can nudify anybody, you can share that image. There is nothing currently at the moment wrong with nudification apps or their use. And I think that is part of the problem, because it's part of a cultural norm. The app is there, we can use the app. It's a little bit like the rise of ChatGPT or Apple's embedded AI systems on its smartphones. It's there, you can use it. Using it is not necessarily a problem. It's what you then do with using it which triggers a problem and causes harm for others. And of course, as soon as you have those tools at your disposal, anything which can start out even as a bit of a joke very quickly becomes very serious, very harmful, and very damaging for girls, particularly in an online space. And it can escalate. It can go from nothing to 100 miles an hour in the space of minutes. We're not talking about something which lasts for a particularly long period of time. Why does all of this matter in the background of trying to think more positively? Well, because what we currently have is an approach which is very much women and girls, and a one-size-fits-all conversation is kind of where we've come at this from. But we are beginning to understand that there are different approaches, there are different experiences, and that needs a different response for the different demographics. We talk about girls, but actually they're not a homogenous group. They're not one group of people with one set of experiences. And that is spread across all sorts of characteristics. It could be regional differences, it could be race, it could be religion, it could be socioeconomic background, it could be all of these things. And quite often there are multiple factors which play a role in the experiences. There is also, at the moment, what I'm going to call an additional category of online harm we're not talking about, and that is the immediate response. And we talk about the harm for girls, the immediate response to that is, but what about the boys? And all of the conversations which start about women inevitably end up talking about women and girls, which is the right thing, but then spread into that women, girls, and then what about the boys? Because boys are also harmed. And that is a conversation which needs to happen. I'm not saying it doesn't, but those two conversations are very different, because experiences, uses, and understandings and what girls and boys in online spaces want are very different. And bringing boys into the conversation about girls waters down the emphasis and the attention that we should be giving the problem that girls in particular are experiencing. I think the other thing, which is also worthy of note and probably isn't a surprise because it wasn't to me, is that where there are reports made of what is potential criminal activity, police officers, generally speaking in Europe, and I'm generalizing, do not take this kind of thing particularly seriously. A lot of the anecdotal evidence that we've got is that the responses are just delete it, it'll go away, it's an online problem, it doesn't matter. Just turn your phone off for a couple of days, it'll be fine. And that dismisses it, but it also diminishes both the trauma and the bigger problem, particularly when it comes to image-based abuse. And of course, the additional aspect of that is it then creates an kind of an environment and culture of fear. So it almost indirectly silences women by not taking it seriously. It silences girls and makes them fearful of what they're going to do and engage, and it really causes disconnections. And for a lot of girls, that is a big problem in the way that we now live, how they meet their friends, how they connect, how they engage socially, how they interact. It's all done through some kind of online mediation in some way. So what I have put this into is what I am calling my circle of online harm affecting girls. And there are a number of different strands to this. I don't think it's as straightforward as to just say there is a harm affecting girls. Like there are, I'm going to say at least 13, probably 14 different categories of harm that we need to think about. And this won't be the same for every girl that experiences some kind of online abuse, but it will very much make people think when they see it about the different dimensions to the harm. And a lot of this speaks to intersecting identities and different characteristics, but a lot of this also really is to think about the bigger picture of the harm and the impact it's having outside of it just being an abusive image or it just being a bit of sextortion. Because actually, if there are issues related to safe environments or sharing devices, depending on the residential arrangements, then that can mean that there is both perpetration and victimhood at the same time on the same device in the same space. And so it's not always as straightforward as assuming that girl A has a problem on girl A's phone. And I think that is one of the things which, particularly when we're talking about girls and children, we tend to overlook a little bit. I think the other aspect to this is that all of these things can happen at the same time. So there can be multiple layers of harm going on at the same time, but we are very unlikely to ever get to all of them with one conversation when we talk to girls to begin with. There'll be an immediate panic reaction, there'll be an immediate trauma response, there will be some immediacy, which is whatever is foremost in their mind, which needs an immediate response. That might be fear of getting into trouble, it might be fear of being in trouble with the police, it might be some bigger fear. But there is also the added dimension. To go back to the deepfakes and the sextortion images, the immediate fear will be it's out there, it's ruined my reputation. There might then be subsequent things about what am I going to do about school? What are my family going to think? And that triggers reputational considerations. And all of that then ties into this broader psychological harm, which is really a trauma-based level of abuse and harm, and it doesn't go away. I think that's the other thing. Quite often there's an assumption from policymakers and lawmakers that when the image or the post or the message goes away, the harm goes away. That is very much not the case. The harm persists because the damage has been done up front. The trust has gone, the impact is prolific and doesn't change. And so all of these things need to be considered about the impact of the harm at one particular point. And the reason it's in a circle is because you can start at any one of these and work your way round through all of them, because the chances are that at least 50% of the different kinds of harm and the different impacts will be present for everybody who's experienced any kind of online abuse, no matter what its form, at any point in time. And as I've already said, once it happens, you then question what you do online every time you're online. That is a trauma safety response, which is just driven into girls, particularly in online spaces now. I think the other thing, and this is really, I'm afraid, doom and gloom, because this is looking into the deep well of what's on the horizon that we're also not thinking about. We talk a lot about AI at the moment, but I think AI is just scratching the surface. There are evolving harms which we're not really fully understanding at the moment. Deepfakes, we're getting there, but we know that the metaverse is on the rise. The way in which people are engaging in what would otherwise be gaming environments is changing. Through any kind of headset, there is now meta violence and augmented violence, so sexual abuse. Any kind of virtual groping is also a form of online abuse, which currently the legal systems and structures aren't that geared up towards recognizing or responding to. But the more that we engage in augmented reality and virtual reality, the more that we're going to encounter these challenges. And I don't think it's too wild to say that it won't be too long before we see grooming gangs working in virtual and augmented reality environments, because that's the next big thing. We also don't really understand the misogynistic tendencies of cryptocurrency conversations or of some gaming environments, and how they bring people into what would otherwise be fairly masculine and toxic masculine environments, the adolescence effect type situations. We know that there are some ways in which these issues will arise and continue to creep into what we do and what we see. And this might be about boys, but actually it's also about girls, because if boys are driven into these pathways, then they are not only becoming victims themselves, but perpetrators of harm, which will then spread and affect girls directly. So there is all of that. I think probably what's also interesting to know is there's an emerging body of research which says that within 30 minutes of watching any video on YouTube, if it's about gaming or about cryptocurrency, you will end up in extreme manosphere content, which is incredibly misogynistic. And once you are in it, it is almost impossible to escape the algorithmic push of additional content, which is very similar to that manosphere content. I think the other thing which is worth knowing, and this is where my cynicism creeps out, is there is a new government strategy on violence against women and girls. Technically, it is called the Strategy Against Violence Against Women and Girls. I choose to refer to that as the Violence Against Women strategy, because I don't think it really touches on things for girls in the way that it should. It also technically ties into the online safety agenda, but the online safety agenda is gender neutral and doesn't necessarily consider the needs of different groups at different ages in the way that maybe it could and or should. But that's my inner cynicism, so I'll put it back in its box. I think the other thing really, which I hope is a bit useful, is in terms of responding to this, if you're dealing with girls who are experiencing harm or worried about what's going on, I think there are some things which help when you start these conversations, and that is very much to avoid blame, to adopt a trauma-informed approach, and to try and validate their experience, even if you don't necessarily agree with what has happened or the way that they're telling you what has happened has happened. And a lot of this is about choice and control, but also making them feel safe. There has to be some way in which all of the conversation and documentation around this is about them and their experience, rather than about blaming them for whatever has happened to them or for whatever part they've played in what's happened. And a lot of this will be coercion. It might be peer pressure, but that's still coercion in some way. So stabilize them, make them feel safe, check in with their emotional state, probably as the number one thing, and then take the considerations of blame out of the way. A lot of the evidence that we have when things are reported to the police is that they say, well, you shouldn't have shared the image. Why did you take the image to begin with? If you hadn't taken it, it wasn't on your device, this wouldn't have happened. And that may or may not be true, but the reality is that is blaming them for what has happened, even if they weren't responsible for what's happened. And so if there is an immediate, they're going to get the blame for it, they're not going to disclose what's happened, so they're not going to get the consideration that they need. I think the other thing, which is particularly important for me and my self-interest, but also researchers and the broader policy agenda, is to document what's gone on, what has happened. If there is any mention of fear, coercion, control, that is important to record, but not necessarily recording the potential criminalization or the criminal harm which may have arisen, because that again feeds into this narrative of somebody has done something wrong, somebody will be in trouble. And I think there is also then feeding into what happens next. Lots of girls, when they are victims of this, don't necessarily want to pursue a criminal response. They just want somebody to say sorry and they want the image to go away. But that is a choice they need to make. It's not necessarily a choice we should impose on them. I appreciate that is potentially difficult with under 18s, but there is still a degree of choice which has to go into what happens next. There's interesting work from Canada where there were lots of cyberbullying situations in schools, and lots of girls had sexually explicit images shared with their school groups. And when those girls were asked about what they wanted to happen, whether it was prosecution, whether the boys should be in trouble and go to court, the response was, no, we don't want them in court. We just want them to say sorry and understand what they've done to us. And so that's a very different response to perhaps that which we would have as adults. So choice and control and a trauma-informed approach to this is probably where I'd say my top tips are in dealing with anybody who's experienced online abuse. I think the other thing is there are some do's and don'ts, and it's really difficult to not impose moral judgments. But the other thing I think which is really important is to understand that in any context of online abuse, there is a gendered dimension, there is an age dimension, and there is a power imbalance between the person on the receiving end, the person who has caused the problem, but also the platform and what the platform can and cannot and will not do. And that feeds into the power imbalance between law response and justice actors as well, because all of those things are gendered and aged and hierarchical and present different barriers to different girls with different intersecting characteristics, responsibilities, and experiences. So I think avoiding moral judgment, avoiding minimizing what has happened is also really important. Even if we think it's just one-off abusive message, to that girl at that particular point in time, that could be enough to make her want to end whatever it is that's going on in her life. And that is hugely psychologically damaging, but we might not necessarily recognize it as such if it's just a one-off occurrence. So it's really important to not minimize or normalize, and we do it a lot. I do it frequently, and I have to check myself. I've probably done it while I've been talking to you this afternoon, but that is just because of the way in which we talk about these things. And then I think the other thing is there are some things that I would suggest we never say to any girl who's been on the receiving end of it. You knew the risks is probably the classic one. What did you expect would happen? All of these are fine with hindsight, but the reality is they're not helpful in the moment and they don't actually address the harm aspect. But there are more supportive things we can do. You have choices, you didn't cause this, you're not in trouble for telling me. All of that is about reassurance and safety, and having that kind of conversation, I think, upfront is really helpful for anybody who is really in a trauma and panic, fight or flight situation when it comes to an online harm response. It is that level of seriousness for most people who've been on the receiving end, irrespective of their age, but at a younger age in particular, it can seem like an awful lot bigger of a problem. And I think my final slide, and I will stop talking at you, but I could go on for hours about this, is that a lot of this is really about safeguarding. I think we don't put it in that kind of framework, but we're really talking about safeguarding in an online harm context rather than safety. Safety, I think, is a platform problem. Safeguarding, I think, is a human problem, and we should talk about it in that way. I think the other thing is, and I've said it already, but I want to hammer the point home, if it happens to you once when you're 11, that changes the way that you think about and engage with and interact with everybody and everything online across your life course. And that is one very simple experience which will change the way that you think about your online interaction. And I don't think it is an understatement to say that one-off occurrences, while rare, change things dramatically across the life course. I think the other thing to bear in mind is we talk about online harm as though it's a series of isolated incidents or different types of behaviours, but quite often it can be a pathway into exploitation, it can be a pathway into greater abuse and violence and other forms of problem involving the justice system or otherwise. We're not very good at understanding that yet, but we know it is one of the pathways which we're starting to see appear a little bit more. And then I think the other kind of flip side to this is we know some things, we know there are some things happening. We are not good at understanding it because understanding the actual direct lived experiences of girls in particular is really hard because you have to get them to trust you in order to have those conversations. And if they don't trust you or the trauma is too great, we're never going to be able to find out what it's like from their perspective. So I still think there is a need for advocacy, age appropriate responses, and accountability in this space. And as an academic, I spend a lot of my time trying to tell policymakers why it matters, but they're like, well, what's your lived experience? And I think my kind of plea to you all would be, this is where you come in because you're the front line gathering this information. If you can share that, that will help policymakers respond better, which might make life better for girls in an online space. And I will stop talking, but I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim. You said you could talk about it all day. I could listen to you talking about it all day. I don't know that you've alleviated our fears, however, and I still feel like a complete dinosaur when any of this comes up because it's like we just absolutely cannot keep up. It's so fast moving, but so helpful to have some practical suggestions in terms of how to respond to girls in these situations of which we know so many girls are affected. I'm going to open it up to questions so we can get some discussion going around this. So we'll just go by hands up and Jess and I will keep an eye on that because I'm sure we've got lots of questions, comments, reflections. There may be things here that particularly resonate for you as practitioners with girls that you have been working with. It might be something as well, because I think we can also be sometimes a bit oblivious to this space that children are moving in as well. So it might be, gosh, this isn't something, I've really reflected on, but now there's room to really think about that and consider that in my assessing girls, in my work with girls and so on. So anybody want to come in and start? And I know Jess and I have probably got 50 questions each as well, if nobody's willing to be the first person. There you go, Angela, thank you.
Hi, it's really more a comment, really. I mean, I think for me, what sort of a lot stood out for me in terms of like figures and the information shared, but I was kind of really struck by the Borg strategy and the online safety, because one of the things that I've kind of always felt that with Borg, it's almost like girls and young girls don't really, it's like they've kind of missed it on that. The focus tends to be, you know, on adult women. So I was interested, like, you know, when you gave your opinion about that, Kim, and I just feel that, I mean, I work in youth justice, and I'm really keen to kind of, you know, bring to the surface and really upskill the team in terms of working with girls, because what we're certainly seeing, we're seeing an increase in girls coming through the courts or on diversion programs. And on the flip side, we're seeing there's quite a few adolescent boys who are coming through with offences around online, um, sending images. And so, yeah, we're definitely at a time where even if it's not nationally being put out there behind the scenes, we are seeing where that movement is going towards. So yeah, I just appreciate the information that you've shared today.
Thanks, Angela. Yeah, really interesting to get that perspective, and I think probably quite helpful for you, Kim, as well, just to hear from practitioners. And as you say, having that sort of that child voice via practitioners is always incredibly helpful, and understanding us and helping us unpick this further. Leonie.
Hiya. I just want to say that was really, really great and comprehensive. I guess I just wanted to ask what your advice would be to agencies and frontline practitioners and charities who are working with young women and girls and young men and boys about how to keep up with these kind of emerging trends and being able to kind of, I can see you smiling because it's almost impossible, but how, yeah, and how to respond to that kind of effectively.
That's like the $1 billion question, isn't it? I think the challenge, as I see it, is I think there's no point trying to keep up with what the legal framework or the strategy documents are or aren't doing, because they change in a heartbeat. I think the reality is we can only keep up with what the technology is allowing us to do, and I will readily admit, even I'm not great at that. I think what nieces, nephews, sons, daughters are doing, we can only really talk to them about, and they still won't share it entirely with us. And I think the best evidence of that was the adolescence documentary, when people are suddenly like, what's the red pill and the blue pill, and what does this mean? Like, I use emojis in a completely different way, and now there's this hidden language. And I think it is that. I think the only way you can do that realistically is to find out what they're doing. And I know a lot of NGOs and policy groups, particularly in Europe at the moment, are trying to make claims, but very, very few of them are actually talking to the people they're trying to advocate on behalf of. And I think that's probably the biggest risk, is that we assume we know what's going on based on what our experiences are of getting a smartphone for the first time. But the smartphones of today are very different to the smartphones of a decade ago and how they're used. And I think it's really about what's happening and user groups and what they're prepared to share. What they're not prepared to share, we can probably work out, but what they are prepared to share will tell us a lot about what they're not prepared to share. So I would talk to them, but getting access to them, I appreciate, is a difficult practical challenge.
Thanks, Kim. We've got a comment in the chat here from Jennifer saying this is both really interesting and scary at the same time. Couldn't agree more. It feels like there needs to be a lot more education for girls and all children in general on how to keep themselves safe online, but also for us as practitioners on how to best deliver early intervention and prevention. Do you have any resources or interventions which can be shared or which are currently being developed? I can come on this after you, Kim, if you want to sort of mention if you've got anything that you can signpost to.
So my headline will be, a lot of this is about teenagers, not about young girls. And a lot of this is fairly generic use your Instagram safety settings, get an Instagram teen account rather than the full adult account. I don't think there's anything great out there. And I think the other side of this is it's being pushed onto schools to deal with. And we know from talking to girls that they don't think teachers are the best place to do that. And they don't want to share what they're doing online with teachers unless they've got nobody else to talk to. So my short answer is nothing great that I would recommend, but I think the changes to education and the way in which we're talking about that will probably lead to some fairly adequate resources soon. I don't want to say great because I don't think they'll be great. I think they'll be adequate.
Thanks, Kim. And obviously we've got Advance here to talk about some of the work that they're doing in this space. So that's going to be really, really helpful. And also just to mention our YJB Resource Hub, Jess and I will do a follow-up to this this call, and we'll put together any resources that are on there and kind of things that come up and crop up in this conversation. So we'll send you out, along with the recording and the presentations today, sort of a bit of a roundup of what we can find to sort of signpost you to as well. But obviously, if anybody does come across anything, please do, again, drop us a line. We can share it to the Resource Hub, we can share it to practitioners and keep that kind of these conversations going. Anything that you do come across, and I think it is, isn't it? So much of it as well is in those conversations. It's in that relational practice with the children that we work with, in terms of having that space where you can have those conversations of trust around their experience, and really keen as well, if anybody is at any point doing any child voice work with the girls they work with, or more generally with the young people that they work with, that would be something we'd be really happy to share and to sort of put out there to the sector more broadly. So, please, let's keep these conversations going. Have we got any other questions or comments for Kim in terms of that online misogyny? Okay. I can't see any hands up, so we can obviously come back to this as well. Kim is going to stay with us for the full session, and that's going to be really great because we will keep this conversation ongoing. But I'll pass on to Jess now so she can share a bit of information about Advance, and we can get their brilliant presentation on as well.
Thanks, Jenny. I was going to say, I think that was a really good segue from Jennifer's question around some practical tools that can be shared to sort of help practitioners. And thank you, Kim, for your presentation. Really insightful. Agree with others saying sort of that quite sobering information, but really helpful for us all to take away, both as practitioners and others working in policy and other departments as well. So thank you. So yeah, I'm going to hand over to Deborah and Leonie from Advance. Advance is a long-established charity who are working directly with young women and girls, particularly in the context of domestic abuse and the criminal justice system. And today, hopefully, they're going to share some really practical ways in which we can continue to support girls in navigating the digital world, really with that greater confidence and safety. So thank you so much, Leonie and Deborah, for joining us today. I'll hand over to you guys.
Lovely, thank you. I'll just share my screen. Can everyone see this?
It's just loading. Yeah, fantastic. It's come up.
Lovely. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I'm Leonie Loftus. I'm the Senior Policy Manager at Advance. And I'll just kind of skip over. So we are, as just mentioned, a charity that was set up in 1998, and we were predominantly a domestic abuse charity. And we were set up to kind of work within the community, building community services, and kind of working alongside and within systems to try and change it. And a lot of the work that we were doing was kind of through the criminal justice lens. So a lot of our kind of the foundations of our work was the kind of principles of IDFA service before IDFAs were kind of officially formulated. And through that, we started to understand, how the criminal justice system worked, because we were so closely embedded into it. And we delivered a lot of that work, and eventually we started to kind of realize that survivors of domestic abuse are everywhere, and many of them are caught up in the criminal justice system, and that kind of and because of the Corson report that came out in 2007, that was the kind of catalyst as to why we set up our criminal justice services. And the idea there was to make sure that we were supporting women and girls in community spaces, but across all of their needs, irrespective of if they've ended up in with a conviction. And then kind of going into the kind of late 20 teens, we started to think, what, you know, this work is getting harder. We were coming into COVID, and we really needed to understand where that prevention approach was. And this is where we started to kind of develop some research around young women and girls. And we started talking to some of the women that we supported and asked them directly, what is it? What's happened? What do you need? And some kind of shocking results came from that. And I say shocking, but unfortunately, they're not surprising, but they always feel shocking, about the levels of kind of trauma that happened at a young age, and those kind of difficult relationships that they were having, those early sexual experiences, often with older men, and not having that kind of support around love, relationships, and sex, but also how to separate those three things. And from there, they told us, you know, they wanted community support. They wanted trusted relationships with adults that were kind of separate. They wanted their parents to understand a little bit more about these things. And that was the catalyst to how we set up our young women and girls service streams. So I just wanted to give you that overall so that you can kind of get an understanding as to where our kind of intersection of the young women and girls services are, and how we work with young women and girls who are impacted by domestic abuse, but also the criminal justice system, and kind of following on from the kind of previous presentation, how it all intersects and interlinks with each other. So a lot of what I was going to say is actually just very, very similar to what Kim was saying. So I'm going to go through it very quickly so I can hand over to Deborah and she can give the kind of practical support that we're saying. But just to kind of utter what was said before, the prevalence of online harm, you know, is significant, and these are similar stats to what Kim had, but 77% of girls and young women are facing online harm. Again, we would assume it is higher. And then we have a service for victims of crime, and we deliver the specialist pathway for young women and girls. And in the first 3 months of us starting that service, 10% of our referrals were directly linked to online harm and social media. And that's directly linked, and that's in the kind of referral pathways that we were given. So it's likely to be much higher than that. And those were cases that were to do with, you know, unwanted explicit imagery, blackmail, grooming, and unfortunately rape. So the prevalence is extremely high. And then obviously the context, I think we're all very aware of, and obviously again was said before, but we are kind of looking at the emerging trends that are really hard for frontline practitioners to keep up with. It's really hard for parents to keep up with, and the kind of disproportionate nature of how it affects young women and girls is really difficult. And obviously we had the Online Safety Act, and as mentioned, there are some important parts of the Online Safety Act, but much of it falls short to how it will actually protect young women and girls, and what impact and protect children and adults in general. And of course, you know, misogyny remains. It's all over our society, and it kind of is epitomized in our in social media. The other thing that we have that I wanted to mention is our Young Futures hubs and the panels. And they are being kind of piloted at the moment. And the reason why I mention it is because there are aspects in that where it's rolling out for young people, but from advanced perspective, we really advocate for a young women and girls approach, a kind of understanding that young girls are not the same as boys, and they're not the same as their adult counterparts. There is a gender lens, there is an age lens, and there is an intersectional approach that needs to that policymakers and commissioners really need to understand. And we don't want them to retrospectively look back at any kind of policy and go, oh, actually, maybe we should have looked at gender and age more specifically. So our kind of key point is to say that online harms is a thing. Violence against women and girls is a thing, and you know, the girls and young women that we are supporting are experiencing it. So let's not look back. Let's do it now. The other thing to mention, obviously, is the strategies, which again, I'll say very similar things. So the Vogue strategy came out, and again, it was very focused on women, which obviously from a domestic abuse priorities point of view is really great. There's obviously some positives in there, but from a young women and girls point of view, we've been calling for specialist support services like ours and like some of our colleagues in the sector, and it just wasn't in there. And we were very happy to see a focus on kind of early intervention to young boys, but our concern was that there isn't any specific referral pathways or kind of promises to kind of roll out national services that are specific for young women and girls and really understand what they need. Despite this, both strategies, the National Youth Strategy and the Divorce Strategy, do allude to the fact that girls are calling for trusted adults, they are calling for safe spaces, they are calling for better, sex education and looking at those dynamics of how to have open and honest conversations about boundaries, about what love means and what sex means, and that they're not always the same thing, and being able to have those really honest conversations. And also being able to look at a kind of broader picture, that it isn't just, boys perpetrating the kind of online harms. It's girls doing it to each other. There's lots of bullying tactics. There's lots of kind of embedded misogyny that is kind of playing out in schools. And so when we've kind of been looking at the work that we're doing, the idea is that we want to take a real holistic approach to how we're responding to this, and trying to keep up with the needs of the girls that we're working with, and really trying to ask them what they need and work with them. So I know I went through that really quickly, but mostly because Kim did a much better job than me of being able to show the kind of wider context. But that's the kind of place that we're working from, and why we set up our Young Women and Girls Service. And I will pass on to Deborah now, who will kind of talk a little bit more about the what we do rather than the why, and then I'll kind of come back in. Deborah, do you want to jump in?
Hello, hi everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Deborah Stillman. I'm head of Young Women and Girls for Advance. I will apologize. I woke up with a cold this morning, so apologies for my sniffling. But I will get through this. Leon is on hand to support as well. So looking at like our figures, what we see in our services. So our support for girls who are victims of crime in London, and the total of referrals we've had, and this is just girls who have come to us mostly via the Met Police in London, and the ones who said they wanted support. So we've had like 1,135 referrals into the pathway. Like 33% of those had been a victim of sexual offense, compared to 17% of boys, when 32% have been a victim of violent crime, and compared to 67% of boys, and 20% had been a victim of stalking and harassment. And just to say, these are girls aged 13 to 17 as well. And in a survey that we've done with young women supported by our service, so 73% said that they ought to have known more about consent and how to say no when they started having sexual experiences. And this is the conversation we've had with the women supporting our service, both women who were offenders, but also women like in our DA services. And they both express like the same feeling, that they wished someone had talked to them more about consent, and like that they could say no, understanding the peer pressure into having like sexual relationships at a young age, and they wish they had like more understanding of that. And we also found that like the average age of their first sexual contact was around 12-year-old, and the average age of their male partners was 16 as well. So next slide, please. And so just looking at like the prevention of VOG, so that is like the primary focus, which is like we do in a formal and informal education on healthy relationships. So we have one-to-one mentoring support plans for all the girls in our service, and this looking like directly on that on the support according to their needs, their understanding, and giving them the space to build that trusted relationship with their mentor, like our Maya program, also as well as offer long-term support for girls, and that will really dig deep into like what are their feelings, their understanding what is exactly that they need, what they're struggling with, and offering them that safe space and a trusted adult that they can talk to as well. And looking into the specialist services for children and young people, making referrals where they're appropriate, especially looking at the gender lens approach as well. And working together with a coordinated community response, which will include like education, social services, healthcare, criminal justice, for a full like holistic approach. Next one, please. So this is like an overview of like what are our support model. We offer tailored group support sessions focused on empowering young women and girls. So we are buying for organizations, so we will have like groups based on like what are the girls telling us that they need, different types of groups, workshops that they can interact with. For Maya program, they'll have support from peer mentors with lived experience. So some of the girls who've been through our programs, they can also then support other young girls with their experience and offer them some guidance and talk directly from their own experience as well. And we offer we have this employment, ETE support and referrals for girls, specifically for girls as well. And we look for counseling we work together with Women's Trust to offer like specialist group counseling for women, for young girls, and always using empowerment models to create a safe space. We have 3 centers across London where the girls can come for one-to-one support, engage with other specialist services, but also to access groups and workshops, and as well have engagement with each other. Like for us, girls have always made it clear that they just wanted a safe space where they can come and it can take a realistic break from their lives. We have a space where girls can just can I watch Netflix because at home I don't have access to that? And we was yes, absolutely, you can do this. This is a space for you to use as you want. And some of the outcomes we've had is 100% start thinking about goals and future aspirations. 100% at the end, when they conclude our program, is knowing what a healthy family relationship looks like, and as well as knowing how to access help for abuse. Next, please, Leonie. And so I wanted to tell you a bit more what are we seeing in our service delivery. So I think this is very similar to what you as well as practitioners will have seen. We have 2 different services first. We have our Maya program, which is working more on the prevention side and is quite broad criteria. So with girls who are at risk of any type of violence, abuse, school exclusion, whether it's domestic abuse or county lines. And then we also have our Young Londoners program, which is directly for girls who are victims. And as I said earlier, most of them will be referred by the Met Police, so girls 13 to 17, whereas Maya is 9 to 25. But across both services, what we have seen a lot is OnlyFans considered as a safe option to make money. And I was talking to a key worker one day, there was out of caseload of nearly 30 young women and girls, about a quarter of them had already disclosed to her that either they will consider OnlyFans or they already had an account, because they're just they have that impression that it's a safe way to make money. I'm in control of what I show. I can control my imagery, and that way I'm not abused because I am in control and I can make money quite quickly this way. Also by being influencer by online influencers, that gives them that idea of autonomy. And it's having that conversation with them about, do you understand the future impacts of this? So the impacts and make you more successful to further grooming and exploitation. And because when you're doing things for money and someone starts offering you higher and higher to do more, eventually it can lead you down to a path you don't really want to go, but you do because you're so desperate to make money. And we do see a lot of cases of AI used as a revenge humiliation tool. And we deal with many cases, in London, where girls, we were dealing with a girl that's someone in school created a fake account for her on Instagram with AI photos of her, and that is being passed around the school. And the teachers, when we talk to the teachers, that it's very difficult for people to keep up with that and to understand the impact of being said, but it's fake imagery. Why does this person care so much? And that is by talking to schools, to other professionals, to the police. It's just well, it's a fake image. It's not her imagery. Why would this impact her so much? When it's it's still your imagery. And as we know, AI tools are getting more and more realistic. There is one point where you can't tell what is fake, what is true, but even it's somewhere of your likeness and your image and it's being shared. It's for young girls when dealing with so much of those anxieties of being a teenager. And all the social impact of your life as well, when all your friends are sharing those images, but unfortunately something we are seeing quite regularly. As well, sexual abuse images shared among teenagers, and as Leonie said, it's used a lot as well, girls from a girl to another girl. We had quite a serious safeguarding recently, whereas a 13-year-old girl shared naked photos of her 14-year-old friend because they were fighting about a boy. There was a boyfriend, and it's posted on Snapchat, and that is shared wide, and it leads to self-harm. It leads to conversations with parents not knowing what to do, how to support their child going through that, and it takes a lot of calls for the police as well to understand how that investigation is going, and trying to understand how far does image have gone, how much can you take, how often can you take it down, how quickly can that be taken down before like the whole school has already seen and that girl's life has been changed quite drastically overnight. We now, on our young Londoners as well, we have seen a lot of sexual violence after initial online meeting. So we share that data about 10% of the referrals coming directly from online harm, but this is as well as an example of their indirect. So we were having conversations with girls where they said, I met a boy online and I made sure to check that he was a real person. I made sure to check that I had like similar mutual friends. So that is that feeling of like, I did everything I could to protect myself online. Now my profile was already private, but he was a friend of a friend, therefore I accepted. I met him, I started talking, I met in a public place, but still after meeting that it still led to sexual violence, led to an assault. And it's dealing with that guilt and that shame and that understanding and having those deep conversations with girls that, like as Kim said, like about the language, is like, you've done nothing wrong. And but it does take a lot to build that trust and to build that their idea of safety on their word and what they experience. We also see a lot of like recording of bullying, harassment, and physical assaults at school. It's the videos and the internet is now, it's every single part of their lives is being documented. When I think about like all of us here who are adults, like when we think about our experience in school, it's dramatically different from the experience these kids that now live in 100% online world experience at school. When we deal with like when we talk to the girls and they say, oh yeah, somebody beat me up in school, do you want to see the video? This is already on TikTok. And it's constantly, every single thing they go through is being documented online. And that is that idea of just like, when I'm out in public, I have to be 100% careful of what I do, of what I say. If someone does something to me, it will be online, the whole world will see it, and then I have to deal with those consequences of that exposure. And as well, I know we did like young men and boys consuming hateful content online, as Kim also said, like when we're doing like it's very easy for boys, like the algorithm will take them very quickly into incel content, misogynist content, and that is from a very young age as well. And so this is just a snapshot of like what do we see in practice, which I'm sure is very common to what you see as well. But it's a very difficult word for us as practitioners in this space to be constantly updated and be constantly reassuring and trying to stay ahead of the curve to how can we realistic support these young people, both in prevention, having those conversations about what are some of the things you can actually prevent and be smart about, and how do you directly support the victims that are experience all of this as well. The next slide, please. So I'll talk about what comes next. So what do we do when we're dealing with all of those type of cases? One is, of course, is the individual safety planning. As I know the previous presentation from Kim as well is discussing, is not telling them this is very common, you're not the only one. It's like your experience is individual, the way that impacts you based on your culture, your background, what is your home life like, what is your situation at school, what are the things like that really means to you, like your circle of friends, your relationships, your trust, what kind of other professionals you already have, your experience with your mental health, and goes as well with SEND needs as well, with just understanding that everything will impact them quite differently, and their ideas of safety planning is different. We were dealing with a case, we were supporting a young girl who was 14 and she was being groomed. But actually, it's her male relatives who were also getting men to sexually assault her. They were exposing her online to get men to come and assault her, and they were pimping her out and getting her raped and abused, but she couldn't understand that she wasn't safe online posting where she was, because as well she had a very low understanding need and very low IQ and understanding. And we were talking to the police and social services, and they just oh well, she keeps posting where she is. Yes, somebody needs to take her phone away. Eventually when she got to a safe place, she went to into care. and they will just like, we have to take her phone away from her because she will be constantly posting where she is about, until her understanding could be of just like, this is, let's work on your safety plan. You are not in a safe space. You're getting like all those professional helps, like a one-to-one support that was denied to you for so long. But as well for the families, it's we talk to parents like constantly as well. We're just like, what do I do? How do I support my child through this? So being like, this is impacting me as a parent to see my child's naked photos being online. Where is the support and the resources for families and parents as well to be caring for their young person in their home as well? And so it's a lot of what we do is that individual safety planning for both the young girl as well as their families. We offer educational workshops for young people and training for professionals around like the work that we do, and that understanding of like, how do you spot some of the signs? How do you talk to young girls? How do you understand that young girls have a different need compared to young boys? And how do you, especially girls in school as well, when we're talking about school exclusion, what are some of the signs you can observe, and how do you be like empathetic and really offers them the support instead of telling them like, well, just delete your Instagram and you won't have to deal with this again. It's not realistic for us to be telling them that. It's not going to happen. They're not going to simply not have social media anymore, and it's not going to make the problem go away. And in constant update of knowledge and training, that's all we can do to stay ahead and know what is the harm coming next. Like we know all about like the notification tools now, which has increased and is more on the forefront of what we're seeing on this online space. It's we have to talk to young people as well, and we have to hear from them. What is it they experience? If we're waiting for us to catch up, that takes longer than actually listening to them and seeing like, what are the social media they're using now? What does this mean? What are some of the languages being used? And they are the specialists. They will know much more than us what is new, what are the things, what are the social media space, what are the things that are actually happening, and is actually listening to them and believing them when they come into us with their issues. And Leonie, want to talk about our toolkit, because I think that goes well with people asking for resources lately, and we can tell a little bit more about our toolkit as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Deborah. Yeah, so I think that was a really good overview of some of the things that we've done and how complicated and complex the needs are of some of the young women and girls around kind of online harms. And it was because of these kind of emerging trends that we decided that we needed to kind of build some of our insights, and we needed to build our knowledge base around online harms and around keeping ourselves safe online and what that looks like. And so we worked with someone called Jay Papero, who is a cybersecurity expert, and she I think she very much wanted to be able to support in this area, and it was through this work that she was able to kind of build a toolkit to address some of those needs. And obviously it's a very vast toolkit. It covers the kind of many areas in which young women and girls find themselves in spaces with quite dangerous people, and unfortunately those people do include their peer groups, and I think that's one of the things that sometimes shocks adults that we speak to, because I think there was a period of time when we thought, well, online spaces is just for older men who are grooming and probably pretend to be a child, but actually a lot of the harms that are happening are also are, as Deborah said, are with people that young girls have done everything that they have been told to do. They have done these checks, they've verified and so on, but actually the harms are just there. So we've been able to kind of pull this together, but as I kind of noted earlier, and I will share this and I'll kind of hand out with you for you to use. What was the kind of trends that have emerged in the last year obviously have emerged quite a lot, notification apps being one of them. They are mentioned in our toolkit, and there are ways in which we've kind of advised. And I will say a lot of our toolkit is for parents, it's for adults, it's for teachers to be able to have, or for practitioners to be able to have these conversations with the young people that they're supporting or living with or associated with, rather than handing this massive toolkit to a young person and saying, read this, now protect yourself. That's not the intention for it. But so the next steps now is to kind of, we've been re-looking at it and trying to work out how best we can, you know, reach out to young people and support them, and utilize the online space as a good thing, as a place in which we can reach out to young people and say, look, this is a great space, you should be able to be on it, but we do need to keep ourselves safe, and we do need to hold, and we need those in power to hold people accountable for their actions. So we will be happy to kind of share our updated version, which we're kind of working on at the moment. I also just wanted to take the opportunity to just say that some of the things that we're kind of calling for or asking for is kind of online and offline and community spaces and kind of support networks. And I think just building on what we've just been talking about is making sure that we have real life safe spaces, so that girls do have an option in communities to go to them, and for those to be communicated to them properly, and for those to be in safe places and they can get to safely. And those safe places can be somewhere that they are online, but being able to kind of to give them a space that is separate to their kind of male and adult counterparts is really important, and that is obviously the work of the Young Futures that we're doing. It does need to be you know, there needs to be a kind of prevention and early intervention model. Happy that the VOG strategy, as I said, has it, but it does need to ensure that professionals are kind of engaging with young people and are spotting the signs, as Deborah said, and working with specialist services like Advance and like others who really are taking a gender and age response, a holistic response, a kind of person-centered, child-centered response, because we are dealing with children, and we need to, and the I can never say this word, but adultification of children that we do, that practitioners and many other kind of policymakers and legislators will often do, is adultify teenagers in a way that just is not practical. I think we also need long-term funding for these sort of services, for these safe spaces. And the reason why long-term funding is important is because, as has already been said, is that the trauma and the impact of the trauma of online harm, but also what girls have to deal with on a regular basis offline. You know, these are happening at the exact same time, and they're experiencing these harms at the exact same time. And those harms live in us. And being able to build trust with a young person, specifically if we're navigating all of these different intersecting needs, care experience, or if we're navigating, you know, problems in school, and if teachers aren't necessarily, they've not had the chance to build that trust with teachers, then that trust is really difficult to build, and it requires really long-term holistic approaches. And and just in terms of the kind of commissioning response, is making sure that we're able to be really flexible in how we respond, because it is such a difficult emerging place, and different trends are coming in all the time. And so being able to be that safe space for us to have conversations and talk with young women and be flexible with girls is really, really important. The other kind of two really quickly is strong accountability. It is meant to be in the kind of online harms bill, and it is kind of built in there, but for it to actually happen, accountability for those online platforms, but also for those agencies that are responding to young girls and diminishing what online harm actually means and how it does, you know, take over their whole lives. It's not just one incident, it's perpetuated everywhere, as kind of Deborah and Kim noted. And then the last thing is that kind of further research. It's, you know, and I think I'm uttering what Kim said as well, but being able to build on that research and being able to kind of, as practitioners, come together, and because young women and girls across the criminal justice and domestic abuse spaces are still very underrepresented, specifically in the criminal justice side. They're very underrepresented, and the data isn't there, and often it's quite a complicated picture because of how we gather that data and how we gather that research. So I just wanted to leave it there, but I think the next slide is any questions, so I will pop that there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, both Leonie and Deborah, and especially Deborah, if you're not feeling very well, thank you so much for coming. I hope you're feeling better soon. Really interesting, and I think it just goes to show how quickly things are changing, because I know that your Control Alt Safety Toolkit only was released last year, was it? And things have changed so much since then. It's a constantly evolving piece, but something I think will be really helpful for our practitioners and beyond. Just thank you for the work that you're doing in this space directly with, I think, the young women and girls, but also in partnership with, as you say, pushing things in a policy in a legislative space, but also across the justice sector, with police, violence reduction units, and obviously our services as well. So I'll open the floor to questions. I'm sure there are a few. Oh, thanks, Leonie, for sharing. Yeah, if there are any questions, people, please feel free to ask. Angela.
Me again. I just wanted to, I was curious about whether or not advance is seen particularly for girls from the global majority who are impacted and affected by adultification. I think that certainly we saw following the child Q trauma that she experienced. I think part of that, personally, I think that was also to do with racism, but certainly she was adultified. So I was just curious to know your organisation, if you have any particular themes of girls from the global majority in terms of the online harm your organisation is supporting girls.
Yeah, I mean, I'll come in, and then Deborah, I'm sure you'll have a much better from yes is the answer. And that's across the board, across all of our services. So the kind of specialist young women and girls, but also where they, that kind of cusp. So that when they kind of fall through our domestic abuse services and our criminal justice services, yes, there is a massive problem, and it is to do with racism and those kind of systemic issues around assuming or stereotyping or stigmatizing girls from the global majority, and also just how that and it's with our kind of criminal justice systems, but it's also with other statutory services and educational settings, and how they all impact each other and how they impact the trust. And again, that kind of feeds into what we were saying earlier about one, having the funding for specialist services, and those specialist services that understand the specific needs of that young woman and girl, depending on who that young woman and girl is, being holistic. And if and that funding around buy and for services has to be embedded in a young woman and girl's approach, but also for that long term, because if for whatever reason they've been subjected to being adultified and being treated in a way that isn't child first, which, to be honest, in the landscape we are in, is likely, then those services that come in, like Advance or whoever else it may be, they need longer, they need more time. And some of those kind of outcomes that are embedded into that, which is, you need to engage really quickly, or you need to do this, that doesn't work for those young women and girls. You need consistent approaches. You need to always, you need to prove to them that you're trustworthy, rather than
Like
the
you
other way
said, you
around.
need that time, don't you? As you said,
Yeah.
time is what's needed.
Yeah, and I would just say, Angela, like as well, like it does show the importance of us working together with other services that can offer that is specialized, like cultural support as well, and their understanding in the importance of grassroots organizations and that multi-agency support. Like we've been talking to an organization that offers like a specialist guidance and support for girls from South Asian background, in their understanding, like they speak like all the languages, but also they do understand, they all of their staff have their lived experience, they grew from the same background, they come from the same culture, and they can really talk to their girl on a one-to-one level about their own experience and understanding, instead of just, it's not a one-size-fits-all support. It's like, okay, you have particular limits and challenges and barriers that came from being from a certain culture, and you came from your families and your values. How can we go around this and give you that support? One of the things we've seen as well, for example, in service, is like girls from some cultures and backgrounds where like their family sees no value in their education, and the girls tell to us like, I'm struggling at school, but my my parents won't pay for a tutor, for example, because they will pay for my brother, but they will not pay for me. Or I'm told as well, I just need to go to school until I finish, and then I'm going to get married. That is, I want to go to college, but I don't think there's an opportunity for me. So we've been looking, for example, and that also comes in that part of the online poverty, and girls having access online to tutoring and to studies, and the importance of that as well, like the positive things of being online connected. So one of the things we're looking to set up this year as well is homework clubs and online tutoring for girls. They can come to our centers and they can access, and they have access to teachers and support to give them that further education, so they're not excluded. But it is something you have to have that holistic look and understanding, and the specialist support is needed as well.
Thank you. Can I ask, is that toolkit pamphlet available? Does that have to be
Yeah,
purchased?
you can just
or
download it. Yeah.
You can download it. Okay.
Yeah.
Are you able to put will we get it on the slides, the link, or do you need to put it in the chat? So we can,
Or should just put it in the
or
chat.
just go to your website?
Yeah.
Okay,
You just put the link directly on the
Lovely.
chat.
Thank you. Thank you very
No
much.
problem.
Thanks, Anja. Great question. We will send it out just for those that aren't able to join us today. We'll ensure that obviously presentations and toolkits come out as well. If there are any other questions, please feel free to put hands up. I was just going to ask both of you. I know some of our London services may already be plugged into. You mentioned Maya and Uplift and the Young Londoners, but I just wanted if you could explain a bit further about referral processes. You mentioned police, but other pathways that there may be for some of our practitioners possibly. Thank you.
So what I'll do as well, Jess, I will send you, so for those who are based in London, I will send you the referral form for our Maya program. We are funded by the VIU, so we are funded mainly across 8 boroughs in London, but if our team has capacity, they will take any girl that lives in London for Maya. For the Young Londoners, that the main contract holder is Catch 22, but there is a referral pathway, which I'll send you as well. There's a form. Either the girls can self-refer themselves, or a professional can refer them. And this is for any young people. Catch 22 will process the referrals, and then for the young girls, they will then send it to Advance. But there's one link where you put the referral, which I will send through. But most of them will come directly via the Met. So when the girl goes to the police and report the crime, the Met, like is supposed to be always explaining to them, you can have like support from a charity around your experience of crime. And I would say as well, it's any crime. So some of the girls that come to us, it could be that it's like somebody stole my phone, but I am 13 years old. I was walking to school on my own. Somebody stole my phone. I now feel a bit insecure, and I have all this feeling of anxiety around being on my own and walking to school again. But sadly, at least a third of our referrals will be for sexual violence and assault for Pan London.
Right. Thank you. That would be really helpful, Deborah, to have those sent out. And just whilst we've got the opportunity, because we have really great representation from across England and Wales, colleagues joining us as well today, all part of the wider group. Could you advise any other sort of similar charities, organisations, potentially in other regions or nationally that are doing as great work as you are?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm happy to send them through. I will say there are loads of organizations that are doing some great work, but there isn't enough. And in terms of the young women and girls space, it's still a postcode lottery as to whether, because obviously there are lots of organizations who will deliver kind of ad hoc services, but a lot of young women and girls will be still placed in either the kind of a women's service or the youth service, depending on the pathway that they're going in. But I'm happy to send the resources that we have. Just don't put me on the spot, but I can send those through alongside with the referrals.
Yeah,
so, and I just
Thank
wanted
you.
to say as well, Jess, we will be launching a helpline in March. So I will send you all the information for you to disseminate. So we'll have a helpline for young women and girls, and to offer them like advice and guidance, but not only for girls that can reach out to us directly, but also for professionals, for parents who wants like just to talk through some experience. And we can so they'll mainly, now our resource will mainly be across London, but as Leonie said, like we can always like have advice. So if you know of any other services like across England and Wales, we can share with us. We'll build our directory services, and yeah, so I will send you more information about that. It's due to launch in March.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Could I just add, sorry, I know I've mentioned young futures a number of times, but because it's and the kind of national youth strategy, but I think any kind of policy opportunity or kind of service delivery that's kind of being piloted or rolled out that doesn't have a gender or age lens at the very beginning, as I said, is a big concern for us. So we've developed a framework where we're trying to kind of push out how VRUs and the kind of similar organizations who will be kind of holding that power can think about how to embed those kind of that gender and age lens from the very beginning. So we'll also share that if anyone's interested to kind of understand how that framework can look and how to develop those services.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you both. And I was just going to say the impact that of what you're doing goes well beyond. I know you mentioned sort of supporting parents and carers who are, sorry, my light keeps going off in the room, supporting their children through this as well. So it's really fantastic to see. Have we got any other questions for Leonie and Deborah? We can look to open the floor, really. I think we're going to give some space, aren't we, Jenny, for sort of wider discussion. Kelly, come on in.
Oh, hi, it's Kelly Leader. I'm phoning from Leicestershire Youth Justice Service. It's more of a youth justice question, really, just in the respect that obviously our assessment tools currently don't really allow for us to screen and really look at from a safeguarding point of view, online activity, girls and boys being exploited online, and whether for future planning there's some thought around what that might look like for us. Because obviously if we were looking at contextual safeguarding, if we were looking at exploitation, there's a plethora of tools and screenings and we're always doing them, whereas without them, sometimes people lose sight of really how serious the situation is. It's like a secondary thing to think about that might come up in conversation, it might not. And some of that is about the fact that it's just not in the assessment tools that we're currently using. So a bit of a big one to ask.
A fantastic question. It's like you read my mind, Kelly. I'd written down the exact same thing when I was hearing Deborah and Leonie speaking to sort of reflect on, and especially something for us, Jenny and I, and for the YJB to consider. Jenny, I know you previously did a session on sort of assessing girls, didn't you? So I don't know if you want to come in on that one.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. And I think it is just that sense of the world moving a lot faster than we sometimes as the adults who are here to protect those children, keep them safe, are able to. But I don't say that as an excuse, because we very much need to be very much aware of the dangers and just that the way that children exist in the online world, and not really making that distinction. I think there's something in that as well between the online and the real world, because the online world is part of the real world, and there's something there, isn't there? I absolutely take your point regarding assessment tools, and that's something Jess and I will certainly feed back, and that's part of a broader conversation around things like the Violence Against Women and Girls agenda as well, isn't it? But just to sort of as well, I think there's an element here, isn't there, with the work that we do with staff and really making it clear that a harm, and with partners as well, that a harm that happens online isn't a lesser harm. So there's both the connectivity between the things that are happening, the sort of person-to-person violence that we've heard about here, that has perhaps started in an online space and then carried over into person-to-person harm, but also actually that harm that is happening online is very, very real harm as well. So that when we're talking about exploitation, it's being very aware that that could be happening online, as well as kind of physically, and really, really being aware of that when we're using assessment tools, when we're assessing children as well. And I think there's a point here too, and this is something that I sort of sought to make, and I had a conversation with Kim about, is that there is, for girls, there is, when they are existing in the world, just by the very fact of existing as a girl, there is harm. And that is that's a really sad thing to have to consider. And we talked about sort of not entirely dwelling on the negative, but that is true of the experience of being a girl. And we've talked a little bit about some of the kind of gender stereotypes, the way that the world kind of perhaps perceives and treats girls. So what we're seeing in the online world is what is there anyway and was there anyway. It's just that unfortunately now is in that space, and that's there in the algorithms, that's there in AI and the way that that's being set up and programmed. And so it's kind of really trying to grasp, I think, as well, that what the online world is the world, and those harms are there regardless of where they may originate or whether they're happening via a device or a phone or in somebody's home. And of course, the fact that those devices are in that child's home as well. So that to take that back to that broader safeguarding point, that perhaps really any conversation that we're having with a child will need to be around not just who are your friends, but where are your friends, who are the people that you're speaking to, who are your peers, who you're interacting with, and those sorts of things, that we really need to be conscious of that. But in terms of assessment tools, I think that's an absolutely excellent point that Jess and I will certainly raise and take back. Sorry, that was a much longer answer than I'd anticipated.
No, it was perfect. It was really eloquent, so, and kind of hit where I was thinking all the way through. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Have we got any other comments or questions? I've just got a couple. I can see Kim's, well, I've been going on and on. Kim's been typing in the chat there. The other thing is the echo chamber of the online is perpetuating other amplified harms offline, e.g. body image harms, mirroring online, offline, new interactions such as AI companions. God, that's another whole world, isn't it, of horror, and the harms that may proliferate there regarding self-harm and so on. Absolutely, it's that whole kind of the mirroring of what we see in the world being there in the online space. And we've got some really good tools as well that are coming up in the chat, which we will share. So we've got there's some Social Switch project. We're offering free online training to practitioners on online harms, sessions for children, and longer specialist course, possibly London specific, but nonetheless worth having a look. So there's some really good stuff there. And an impact of social media and online harm last year that was done, that Harley has shared, not specific to girls, but there's a graphic there to try and illustrate that overlap and conjoined realities. And I think that's a really, really important point that's come out an awful lot today. Okay, have we got any other comments, any reflections from practice? I'm really interested to hear from you what you're seeing, what you're experiencing with girls that you're working with, in terms of their online reality, their world, and any harms that you've encountered, whether that is from, you know, this is something that we did that's worked really well, or indeed this is a problem that we're encountering and we don't really know what to do about it. So really, really interested to hear from you in regards to practice. Leonie.
Sorry, I'm aware I've just spoken, but I was like, I'll come in. One of the things that kind of Deborah already kind of alluded to it. One of the things that has come up a few times with colleagues is the kind of OnlyFans or very similar platforms to that, live streaming, the kind of sugar daddy platforms, and obviously this is like specific for kind of over 17, over 18-year-olds. It's meant to be. It obviously isn't always, and there are lots of loopholes that young people are able to find. But I think how that conversation around inequality and poverty and empowerment and self-esteem and all of those different things link to that. And I think there is a conversation to be had around empowerment and what that looks like, being really important. And, you know, I'm not one to kind of shame or do whatever, but there is a conversation to be had about the slow and insidious nature of grooming and how platforms like that utilize grooming and utilize how for a lot of the young girls that we've worked with, they they didn't see it coming. And this is really common offline as well. So it's not, these aren't things that we're not aware of. It's just how these platforms are used, and how, and very similar in gangs as well, is this idea that you get something and everything feels really great and I'm in control, until all of a sudden they're not in control anymore. And that sudden feeling of not being in control when you felt so in control for so long, and how that can really impact some of the young women we're kind of working with. And I think, again, to Kim's point around grooming gangs online and what that looks like, and how that looks like in all different platforms, whether it be sexual exploitation or criminal exploitation or both of them at the same time. I think that when we are looking at kind of gangs and exploitation, when we forget about how online and technology is utilized in those areas, then we're kind of doing a bit of a disservice to some of the girls that we're working with. But yeah, I wondered if that was something that other people have seen in their work.
Possibly stunned everybody into silence there, Leonie. I'll come in, but please do put your hands up if you've got anything that you are willing to share, would like to share, or indeed questions. It's really interesting, isn't it, actually, because some of there's a couple of things that are coming to mind there, and linking up to the sessions that we've had as well about that kind of criminal exploitation alongside sexual exploitation of girls, and how that's something that's quite overlooked sometimes, perhaps because of our own gender stereotyping, and just really thinking about that and thinking about the sort of empowerment sort of side of things. I know that actually some of the girls groups that people have shared work that they're doing on here have been around empowerment, and that's such a part of it, isn't it? Is that self-esteem and that eroded self-esteem that girls experience, and then just thinking about the vulnerability of the girls that we're working with, and the sort of part of the unmet need plays in here, and that seeking of belonging, and that seeking of care and love, and all of those elements that really are kind of enhancing the vulnerability, and particularly so often the girls that we're working with in youth justice, and how sort of we really do need to be much more robust as a system in protecting girls from those risks and those harms. Absolutely. Has anybody got anything to go? Sorry, Jess, I think you've taken yourself off mute. I don't know if you were going to come in there.
Yeah, apologies. I was just going to reflect on something that someone, Ellie, shared in the chat, just around some of the girls that they're working with have shared that they spend up to 5 or 6 hours online on TikTok and various social media platforms, which really shows that point of how much of a big part of girls' lives, online spaces and social media are. And I think goes to the point, I can't remember which of our guest speakers shared, but the response to this is not to just not do it, because that's changing a child's, a girl's life, and also goes into that sort of thing around the victim blaming aspect of it as well. I did wonder what practitioners would feel. Something that I've been reflecting on is we've spoken so much around trust and relational practice and engagement, and quite often we're not working with girls for the longest amount of time, and I just wonder if practitioners feel that things are shared. There's something around girls recognizing what's healthy, what might be unhealthy, but I wonder if anyone feels that time plays a part in this, and in how long practitioners are working with girls. And I think it's really great where we've got referral pathways and other organisations that are doing that work as well, but potentially within a youth justice space, that might be a factor in it. Maybe it's just me thinking that myself. Alex, feel free to come in.
Thanks, Jessica. I think you're quite right in terms of sort of timescales. I think, when we get them in youth justice, and often girls that have already experienced a lot of difficulties or trauma, and some of those exploitation concerns are quite ingrained. They're coming on a diversion. We've got 12 weeks. It could take us 4, 5, 6 weeks to start to build a relationship, and that relationship's there at the point that we've almost completed the work, and we haven't even started to dig or understand the wider concerns. However, what we do more locally is sort of complete that diversion, send that back to the police, and we do have the option to open them on a voluntary programme. We also have an exploitation team within our youth justice partnership. So we work very closely alongside them, and are they better managing the diversion than opening to a youth justice worker? So that battle does continue for us sort of that way. But I am thinking particularly about one girl in particular where we talk about, the OnlyFans, and she's 13 years old and she's making about £800 a month on Just Feet. And this is an ongoing battle for us, how we sort of intervene, how we prevent that. But to her, that's a lot of money, and she's literally just turned 13. But we kind of put disruptions in and break down one platform she's on, and she'll find another, and it's that digital world gone mad, isn't it? Because she clearly knows a lot more about it than we do.
Yeah, I think that's the quite scary thing, that I was speaking to some colleagues in the police, and they said that, they were sort of speaking to a room full of adults who were saying, what is this? But we were talking earlier about emojis and that space in which the children are living, and are quite often know a lot more than we do and about it. But really good point, Alex. I think it goes to what Harley's mentioned in the chat around the dopamine hit, as it were, that children will sort of experience from social media. And I think there, if we look at what that girl is getting from that, obviously the financial gains, but we spoke about sort of how we can use and recognize and build strengths and belonging in other ways, and in healthy ways, I think, across social media. So thank you for sharing, Alex. Really helpful.
No problem.
Anything from anyone else?
I think it's just so huge, isn't it? It's almost like where to begin. But it's been so helpful to get a chance to talk about all of this and to recognise. And I think as well, just so grateful to our speakers in terms of just those practical suggestions, because it's always really helpful to have that, isn't it? And thanks for everybody who shared sort of suggestions and resources that they've come across in the chat. And please, if you do come across anything further, or suddenly you encounter something in 2 weeks' time, think, oh my goodness, this was so relevant, please do send stuff on to Jess and I, and we will disseminate it to the members of this group. We're very keen to make this something that's practically useful and helpful, and to be part of protecting girls. And particularly, we've talked previously about the vulnerability of the girls that we're working with in youth justice, and so anything that we can share to support other practitioners in this space is so valuable. So please do, if you come across anything further, even if there's nothing, or if you've got something but you don't want to share it today, please do send things on to us, and we will share it, and we will put things onto the Youth Justice Resource, the Youth Justice Board Resource Hub with your permission, so that it can be shared more broadly across the sector, because this is we've kind of had some horrifying examples shared, haven't we? And this is just sort of the tip of the iceberg, really, as well, as we know. If there's anything else from anybody want to share any kind of final thoughts, suggestions, or anything, please do feel free to do so. But we're not going to keep you all here for the last 10 minutes and make you sit here as we try and get people to join. Pippa, thank you. Hi, Pippa.
Hiya. I just wondered what anybody was thinking, or actually what the YJB is thinking, kind of in the context of the brilliant conversation that we've been having around the current discussions around the potential social media ban. It's something which at the National Children's Bureau we're kind of really thinking through at the moment. And given we've just, had a huge amount of conversation on that kind of issues that are very much related to that in terms of how we manage the risks and the potential harms that are online. I just wondered whether the YJB or anyone on the call really had any thoughts about what the kind of policy solutions to that are, and whether the current proposal, which The ban was recently, the amendment was passed in the House of Lords. It's now going to be discussed in the House of Commons. The government has announced that they're going to do a consultation, which implies that they're probably not going to go for the ban at this point. But I'd just be really interested to hear what anyone on the call's thoughts were on that, like whether or not that's the speakers, whether it's yourself, YJB colleagues, or anyone else really.
Thanks, Pippa. It's huge, isn't it? It's such a complex thing, and Leonie's just actually posted in the chat a conversation that's going on in advance, and likewise, this is something that in some of the girls' work that we do internally, we'll be having conversations around. But I'll bring in Kim at this point.
Thanks, Jenny. I think it's a fascinating question. I think there are some real challenges around it. I get the safety aspect potentially, but I think actually the bigger question from where I sit is the ban going to change anything, or is it just going to shift everything into a more compressed time window on the one hand? And I think on the other hand, if we're going to ban, then how are we going to enforce that ban? Because we've got age verification ostensibly at the moment on platforms and online systems coming in that's going to be enforced, but it's so easy to circumvent age verification. Not an answer. Ban, I'm not convinced there's an answer either. I think Australia's example is interesting. I am a cynic and I think that's pretty clear, so I'm going to say that I think there'll be a consultation, I think there'll be some policy papers, I think the government will say we're going to wait 5 years and see what happens in Australia. I think what's perhaps of maybe more interest is what's happening in Scandinavia in terms of how they're approaching social media and all of that sort of thing. I think if it's a social media ban only, then my answer is what's the point? Because that is just one dimension to this. It's only social media. It's not going to solve the problems. It's just going to drive them into other spaces. It's going to drive them into gaming environments more overtly, going to drive into different platforms. It's not going to solve the problem with VPNs and lots of different workarounds, which will become monetized as we know they will. So I would say it's almost like a sticking plaster on a severed artery. But I'm a cynic and I'll be making that representation in response to the consultation when it comes out.
Thanks so much, Kim. Really, really interesting. Yeah, just so much complexity, isn't there? And that, yeah, to acknowledge that the issues we're talking about are wider than just social media and wider than just the internet, if people even say the internet anymore. I don't think they do. You know, we're talking about issues that are societal, aren't we? And therefore there's so much work around in those spaces as well, beyond the tools that are being used that move so quickly to abuse children and specifically girls. Jess, sorry.
No, not at all, Jenny. I was just going to ask a question off the back of that, really, if I could, to Pippa, Kim, Leonie, and others. If you've had interactions with young people, what they're saying about that, what's their sort of opinion on that? Do they find it would be helpful to do that, or Pippa, come in?
Thank you. We're actually having a session with our Young NCB, which is our advisory group of young people, on Saturday, and on a number of different topics, but this is first up on the agenda. So I would be very happy to feed back. That's quite a diverse group of young people who've got all different backgrounds and kinds of experience, etc. So we're really looking forward to hearing what they find out. I'm more than happy to send you the kind of top lines if anyone's interested in that. And I think it would be really interesting to see what our young people that are involved with youth justice services think as well, because they will have their own views, I suppose, particularly if their online interactions, the online world, has in any way been part of the reason why they've ended up in the criminal justice system. So I think it would be fascinating to think about it from a youth justice point of view as well, in terms of what those young people's kind of unique perspectives are as well. So if anyone else is planning on doing any engagement with young people in their services or anywhere else, then I'd be really keen to hear from you, because I'd be really interested to understand.
Thanks so much, Pippa. I think we often find with these groups, it's never the end of a conversation, and that goes across, organisations and services. That'd be really fantastic. Thank you so much. So I think if there's nothing else from anyone, just want to thank our guest speakers again, and thank you so much for staying after and contributing to sort of other discussions. Really valuable to have your input into that. And of course, thank you to all of our services and representatives from other organisations that have joined us as well. It's been a really interesting topic for us to cover, and as I said, definitely not the end of it, and there's so much more that we could have covered, but hopefully it's been helpful for you all. I think we have a lot of resources to send out with you afterwards, which will hopefully be of some use, and please do let us know if you do find them helpful, and also we'll let colleagues know who have created them. So thank you, everyone. Lovely to see you. Just a quick reminder, if there are further thoughts around future topics, please let Jenny and I know.